Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I wanted to talk about why I do not like the MCU's take on Spider-Man as a character.
Nigga, you gotta be ashamed of yourself, nigga. Real talk, you gotta be ashamed of yourself.
Before we get into this video, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Also, turn notifications on if you want to get notified anytime I upload a video or go live. And I want to preface this video by saying that I have nothing against the actors, which I'm going to criticize in this video, Tom Holland and Zendaya. I don't have any issues with them as an actor or actress. I mostly have a problem with the way their characters were lighted up by the MCU. One thing that I also want to bring up before I get into like the bigger details that I want to speak on is that this MCU Spider-Man feels more of a fan service because his story isn't nearly as deep or compelling as Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movies or Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man movies. So I do have a list on my computer right now, so you guys might see me reading off. It's just because I planned this video out. I actually have it scripted and well thought out. So the first thing on my list is definitely the suit. I do not like the suit in the original Spider-Man Homecoming movie, strictly because it was too much CGI. We got shots in the trailer where the suit wasn't fully CGI and it looked 10 times better than what it did in the movie. There's a lot of YouTube videos showing side-by-side comparisons of the shot in the trailer and the shot in the movie, and you can definitely tell the differences. My favorite Spider-Man suit by far is the Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit.
Good morning, New Yorkers. Looking for another beautiful day here in the city. Blue clouds to start us off.
The steady increase in sightings of Spider-Man has sparked a national debate over the role of vigilantism in American crime fight.
And I feel like going off of that movie, Marvel had a lot to work with when it came to suit designs, but I feel like they kind of went in the wrong direction, especially kind of like with the hex bug thing, like that they did on his chest for a Spider-Man emblem. I didn't really like that emblem either, but obviously that's just a personal choice type of thing. I also don't like how his suit is super high-teched out given by Tony Stark. And I'm going to go into more of Tony Stark stuff and tech stuff later on in this video. But I just want to say that because I feel like Spider-Man is supposed to make his own suit. It's supposed to be kind of a homemade suit. I mean, obviously we did see Peter in his homemade suit in parts of Civil War. And I think in the beginning of Homecoming, but I'm not 100% sure about that part. But we definitely saw him in a homemade suit before. But I feel like he's just given too much stuff from Tony Stark, which again, I'll touch on later in this video. Another issue that I had with his suits is that I don't understand why he couldn't invent his own suits. Spider-Man is supposed to be a super smart kid that struggles with everything else in his life. He's getting everything gifted to him by a billionaire, and that we don't really utilize that aspect of his Spider-Man. Whereas in the Raimi trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movies from that series, we get to see that both of those characters work on their own suit. We get to see them learning how to use the webs in Tobey Maguire and making the webs in Andrew Garfield. Also, another thing that I'm kind of mad about is that they gave him so many suits and he's only had 2 of his own movies. He got his own suit in Infinity War and Endgame. He also had his regular suit, and then he had the Tony Stark suit as well as his regular Homecoming suit. That's already 4 suits in the span of only 2 main movies and a few cameo movies. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention the stealth suit that he gets in Far From Home. In my opinion, that's just too many things going on at once. I feel like Peter Parker is supposed to be more grounded, but at the same time, with them implementing Tony Stark in the way that they did, he really does get everything handed to him. Another thing that I don't like about him that I basically touched on before is that he's not relatable. He's really getting everything given to him. Whereas in the Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield movies, they were building their own stuff. They were starting from ground zero. They had issues in their family, Uncle Ben for example, and they kind of had to overcome it, come past that, and that was something that kept motivating them. Spider-Man really has no motivation. He's living already a luxurious life. Aunt May obviously can afford that super nice apartment in Queens, so she has a great job. There's nothing that's kind of limiting Spider-Man mentally. There has to be some sort of mental cap that the MCU has to put on him, and that's the barrier that his character has to break. Tom Holland's Peter Parker goes to what looks like a higher-end public school or a private school that can afford trips to DC and Europe. And people still complain about Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker having spider blood in his DNA, when this is just 10 times stupider because he's just getting everything handed to him. At least in The Amazing Spider-Man, there was a good backstory, a solid backstory for Peter Parker and how he got his spider powers. In this movie, Tom Holland's Spider-Man is just given everything. He never actually earns any of it. Like I was mentioning before about the personal life struggles, that is the one thing that I want to actually go deeper into because I feel like there's a lot more to be said about that. Essentially, Peter Parker's character is supposed to be a loser. He struggles at his jobs, he can't pay rent, and he has girl problems. But in the MCU Spider-Man, we get none of these. In the Raimi movies and the Amazing Spider-Man movies, Aunt May is a struggling single parent. But in the MCU, they want a cool, young Aunt May that can take care of Peter and pay off living in a decently sized apartment in New York City. Putting it plain and simple, Spider-Man is no longer relatable in the MCU. His name got out there. That's the only consequence that he's ever faced.
Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker. What the?
And in my opinion, that's a move in the right direction. I think that's a great idea that Marvel did. Marvel was finally giving him some sort of consequence, and they're finally tying in these other movies to him. But on the other hand, we cannot go past the fact that in Spider-Man Homecoming, he lost little to nothing. I understand that in the MCU movies, they didn't want to implement Uncle Ben because everyone had seen that story a million times. But at the same time, I would rather have Uncle Ben's death motivating Peter Parker than Tony Stark giving him everything and basically giving him hand-me-downs and him having no risk in his life at all whatsoever. Normally, Peter Parker is known to be shy and quiet around girls, but in the MCU Spider-Man, Peter Parker and Spider-Man are basically the same thing. At times, you can't really tell a difference in his personality, whether he's in a suit or whether he's without his suit. Like I mentioned before, I hate that there's a lack of consequences in this movie, and actually, I just did an interview with Soups and my friend Brantley Gibson. It's on my podcast channel, Off the Dome. You guys can click the link in the description for that. And in part of that podcast, we talked about our favorite Spider-Man, and we all decided that Tom Holland was the worst out of all of the Spider-Men just because of the lack of consequences he faces. In my opinion, the consequence in Far From Home would have been a lot better if he actually lost someone. For example, if his teacher died, or he made a wrong decision, or one of his friends even died. Or maybe if Happy wasn't there to save his friends, and he had to balance killing a villain or defeating a villain and getting his friends, which is stuff that both Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man had to do. Overall, Tom Holland's Spider-Man has always had someone there to bail him out, whether it's Tony or even Tony's assistant Happy. Tom Holland's Spider-Man just never seems to be alone, and I feel like that's one of the biggest issues with his character. In my opinion, this movie also has the worst love interest out of the 3 different types of Spider-Man. I'm not gonna hate on Zendaya because I love all of her other projects, and I love her acting in this movie, but at the same time, just as a character overall, I feel like her character is the weakest out of all of Spider-Man's other love interests. Gwen Stacy was amazing in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, but MJ was a little bit dull in the Raimi trilogy. But on the other hand, they're both still way better than Liz or MJ in the MCU. In my opinion, Liz just simply wasn't given enough time to be developed, and she was just Peter's high school crush. Peter only likes Liz because she's smart, hot, and popular, but we barely learn any of her interests or ambitions. Now, Michelle Jones, also known as MJ, is a little bit better, but in my opinion, she's still very, very underdeveloped. In my opinion, the MCU's action sequences, including Spider-Man, are super duper bland and weak. They also always have Spider-Man getting his butt kicked, which makes no sense to me. It also makes me question why Iron Man chose this kid. We barely see any web slinging or crawling normally. We only see a little bit of that, and I feel like the biggest part of Spider-Man is him learning how to use his powers and him crawling for the first time, and us seeing his character actually develop over time. In the MCU, we've never really seen any of his characteristics like these actually pop out compared to what we saw in the previous Spider-Man movies. And although the MCU Spider-Man movies definitely have one of the larger supporting casting roles, they're definitely the weakest. Ned was okay, but nothing special. And again, I want to keep saying this over and over. Aunt May and her relationship with Peter suck. They're absolutely horrendous and garbage in my opinion. There's no tension between them. If they killed off Aunt May and Peter was crying about it, I would not give one single about it. You know why? Because there's no real genuine connection and there's no weight that the MCU has actually built to where we actually care about their relationship. In my opinion, I really don't see why Spider-Man needs another clique next to him. Why can't he just do everything on his own? Especially in the MCU if he's the chosen one from the billionaire Tony Stark. Now the final thing I want to talk about, and this one is probably the most important outside of the consequences topic, is that there's too much Iron Man influence on this Spider-Man character. I really do understand what they were doing with Iron Man in these movies, but honestly it comes off as borderline replacing Uncle Ben. They made Iron Man way too much of a focus or focus on the wrong elements. Seems like Iron Man is just giving everything to Peter Parker, and he's acting like Peter Parker is the chosen one. But in this case, Peter Parker is still getting his butt whooped by all of these villains. Peter Parker didn't make any of these things in the MCU. He was given all of them. I know a lot of people have actually been mentioning that we should have gotten Miles and Tom Holland's Spider-Man together because they have a lot of similarities. But in my eyes, I feel like that would have just been disappointing, and I'm kind of glad that they're waiting to introduce Miles into live action until later on, because I really don't want the MCU in charge of bringing Miles to live action, because I feel like they won't actually do him justice when it comes to losing figures in his life. And I know a lot of people saying that they didn't include Uncle Ben, or they didn't include some kind of motivation for him to keep pushing on as a big thing, and it's not a big deal to them. But if you think about it, that's Spider-Man's main reason for fighting crime. It's because he wants to live up to that image that Uncle Ben had him as. I know this quote is super cheesy, but Uncle Ben did say it best.
With great power comes great responsibility.
And in my opinion, the MCU Spider-Man has no power because he was given it all to him by Tony Stark. Everything was given to Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And yes, Far From Home raised the stakes a little bit. But overall, Tom Holland's Spider-Man has been fighting with no consequences so far, and I really hope Marvel can fix it in the next movie. I hope Marvel doesn't mess up this next movie when it comes to telling Tom Holland's Spider-Man's story. And that's basically all I have for this video. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And I know, this video is just my opinion. Everyone has different opinions. Let's have a civil discussion in the comments down below, and I'll be responding to as many comments as I can. Like I said in the beginning of this video, if you guys aren't already subscribed, make sure you do so. Also turn on the notifications so you get notified whenever I post a new video or I go live. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.